Good day, everyone. I am Maria Charisma P. Estrella, and together with me are Mary Liv Faylinn LICARDO, Jessica Ann Morales, Bianca Celine and Jason Hill Villanueva. Today, we will be presenting a topic entitled A Battle of Rights and Accessibility, a case study on the ethical dilemmas imposed by book and educational content piracy. Now, let's look at the overview of the presentation. First, we will be discussing the background of this topic, and then we will follow with the moral actions and moral persons involved. Next would be the ethical issues at hand, as well as its relevance to our present society. And then we will be introducing our argument and the different rebuttals that come around it. Following this would be the resolution, and lastly would be the recommendations and conclusion of the topic. To give background on the topic at hand, it is first important for us to recognize that access to information is a right that everyone wishes to enjoy. However, certain limitations could come into play. One of these would be first, limited opportunities. Second would be financial constraints posed by poverty. And last but not the least would be lack of affordable resources. Because of this, people usually resort to illegal means of getting information, which may include piracy. Specifically, can be book or educational content piracy. Now, there are two types of piracy, and it can occur online or offline. Online piracy includes sites such as Sci-Hubs and LiveGen. On the other hand, offline piracy involves photocopying of materials that tamper the copyrights of authors and publishers. However, it is first important to note that piracy is not a victimless crime. Rather, it also steps on the copyright and the rights of the different authors and publishers that create and produce the content.
To further elaborate on the case of book piracy, the moral persons and moral actions were identified. Beginning with the moral persons, in the issue of book piracy in the Philippines, Filipino consumers of the media serve as the moral agents, with their piracy considered as the moral action being evaluated. Meanwhile, authors, editors, and publishers of books are the moral patients in the issue, as the act of piracy committed by the Filipino consumers disrespects their intellectual property and fair use rights.
The issue of book piracy gives rise to the struggle of balancing between the moral actions of, number one, protecting intellectual property rights, number two, promoting fair use principles, while also, number three, ensuring the availability and accessibility of literature for all. It is important to protect the intellectual property rights as it is a means to safeguard the economic and moral interests of authors and publishers for them to continue in the creation of their literary works. Promoting fair use principles allows for the accessibility of these literary works, as it recognizes that certain uses of copyrighted material are permissible even without the permission of the copyright holder. However, book piracy often involves the unauthorized distribution and reproduction of entire books without the permission of the copyright holder, which clearly violates intellectual property rights and fair use principles. This action is largely driven by the financial incapacity of the people to purchase access to these literary works, particularly in countries or regions where poverty and low income levels are prevalent. In these cases, the commercialization of books can be seen as a barrier to knowledge and education and may be seen as a violation of the right to access information.
Now, let us discuss why online piracy is an ethical issue. Online piracy is an ethical issue because the act of pirating is a violation of the intellectual property rights of the original owners. By definition, piracy is an illegal act and a punishable crime according to the law. However, online piracy is often the only method for many people to access information and resources. Access to information is a right, and online piracy is a solution to the lack of accessibility to information. Additionally, online piracy directly benefits those who engage in it, but does not necessarily harm those who are affected by it. Online piracy is not as comparable to theft, as it does not deprive the original owners of their real property, only their potential profit and income. So online piracy reduces potential sales for authors and publishers But if the medium is already inaccessible, then there might not be any sales either. The Philippines is one of the highest consumers of pirated content in the Asia Pacific, with digital piracy ranging from movies to journal articles. This can be attributed to several reasons, including the inaccessibility of internationally published books and journal articles. Moreover, the slow internet connection in the country also contributes to the widespread practice of internet piracy, such as file and media sharing. The low economy in the country also pushes people to find alternative ways to consume media. Thus, this raises the question of how digital piracy in the Philippines can be considered a morally reasonable action, despite being against the law.
Now, let's head on to the argument. The issue of book or educational content piracy has been a contentious topic in the Philippines. While some believe that author and publishers' copyrights should be protected, others argue that the public's right to access information should always be considered. Hence, we have a battle of the rights. In light of this, it can be argued that the best way to resolve ethical issues or the ethical case of piracy is to look into the roots of the problem. Thus, this essay then takes the position that making educational contents more accessible is the best way to combat content piracy in the academic discipline. This argument is presented based on the grounds that increasing accessibility will result in first, reduced demand for pirated books, second, greater sense of accountability among educators and students, and lastly, is equitable access to education. Now, let's head to the first ground, which states that by increasing accessibility, there will be a reduced demand for pirated books. So for several reasons, making educational materials more accessible could actually help battle book piracy in the Philippines. One of these is the reason that by increasing access, fewer population members of our country will resort to illegal pirating. Many individuals resort to piracy because they cannot afford the high cost of textbooks and other educational materials. Well, here we have two supporting studies. First, we have by Zhong et al. In 2020, and the second is by Schlosser in 2016. According to a study by Zhong et al. In 2020, reducing the price of educational materials by 10% could lead to a 12% reduction in piracy rates. On the other hand, the study of Schlosser in 2016 also supports this argument, as she further explains that when legitimate access to digital content is easy and convenient, the consumer's incentives to search for illicit copies are usually reduced, and the relative cost of piracy is increased. Thus, increasing the accessibility of educational materials at an affordable price can lead to a decrease in piracy rates. Now, it's time to go to the second ground of our argument, which states that there will be a greater sense of accountability to students and educators if there will be access to more educational content. So the increased accessibility of educational materials may actually positively influence the ethical behavior of both students and educators towards obtaining and utilizing resources that are legally obtained. Now, there are two supporting studies that highlight this specific ground. First, we have Osheng and Gyasi in 2021, and the second is by Kukla-Gries et al. In 2020. According to Osheng and Gyasi in 2021, they argue that open educational resources provide a more ethical and legal way for individuals to access educational materials, and this can actually encourage responsible behavior among students and educators. Moreover, in terms of the study of Kukla-Gries et al. In 2020, they were able to state that increasing the availability and affordability of educational materials can lead to a reduction in piracy rates, since individuals are more likely to obtain these materials legally when they are readily accessible, thus promoting good behavior. Here, by making educational resources more available, individuals are encouraged to uphold legal practices in acquiring and using said materials. Going on to our last supporting detail for our argument, we have the statement, by increasing accessibility, we get equitable access to education. So in this, by making more accessible materials, this could lead to a widespread and equitable access to education across various countries. In the Philippines, there are significant disparities in access to education, particularly between urban and rural areas. Typically, the differences and the limitations posed by geography can actually affect piracy in so many ways. And in doing this, by making educational materials more accessible, this could help bridge the gap. So here, we will be providing students in rural areas with same access to quality educational materials as their urban counterparts. And these can actually lead to an improved academic standing and outcomes, as well as greater opportunities for students coming from all backgrounds. A supporting study for this specific ground is made by Halim et al. In 2022, and they found that increasing access to educational materials have a significant positive effect on the educational outcomes in developing countries such as the Philippines. So here, while it is true that increasing the accessibility of educational materials could reduce the demand for pirated books, several factors can actually limit the effectiveness of this approach.
Copyright protection and fair use principles are essential in promoting innovation. They encourage authors to invest their time and resources in producing high quality research and other forms of work by providing them with exclusive rights over their works. These exclusive rights allow creators to monetize their work through subscription fees or individual article access. Furthermore, copyright protection and fair use principles ensure that authors receive rightful compensation for their work. Without such protection, others could freely reproduce, distribute, and exploit the works of authors without permission or compensation. This would create a disincentive for researchers to invest their times and resources in pursuing the production of new materials and novel studies. In exploring the option of establishing an open access system for the dissemination of these materials, lowering paywalls can decrease income for authors, editors, and publishers, which can ultimately lead to their difficulty in producing quality materials. Considering that these entities have to go through a process of research, writing, editing, formatting, printing, and marketing in creating literature and research materials, making these materials more accessible would often involve taking away from the researcher and the publisher's income through various means. That said, reducing the cost of literature access may not be financially feasible for authors and publishers. Copyright protection and fair use principles are argued to be necessary to incentivize innovation and ensure rightful compensation for authors. However, financial barriers prevent many individuals, especially in low income countries and small scale institutions, from availing expensive subscription fees or even individual article access. Paywalls and subscription fees disproportionately affect marginalized groups who are already at a disadvantage in terms of access to education and research resources. High costs of availing literature restrict access to research, thereby limiting the ability of individuals to expand their knowledge and make informed decisions. Limited access to academic research is a serious issue for countries like the Philippines due to economic conditions and unequal distribution of resources. Research piracy tools, hence, could be seen as a necessary action or the only viable option to overcome these inequalities and allow access to information that would otherwise be unattainable. Scholarly publishing companies have profit margins even higher than those of popular magazines and newspapers. The current academic publishing landscape is dominated by a few big publishers who often charge exorbitant fees for access to their content, creating a system where access to research is gated by financial costs. This raises ethical concerns about the accessibility and affordability of academic research. Hence, publishers need to reconsider their pricing models and explore alternative methods of open access publishing to promote equitable access to knowledge and support the advancement of scientific research.
Given the lack of accessibility in the Philippines for educational media, the The ethical question of digital piracy can possibly be resolved by prioritizing information accessibility. One possible action to be taken in order to increase access to information is to establish more public libraries throughout the country. According to the National Library of the Philippines, there are a total of only 1,634 libraries throughout the whole country as of April 2023. Studies suggest that there must be one library for every 3,000 people. Now, given the population of the Philippines being over 100 million, it can be seen that there is a severe lack of public libraries in the country. Otherwise, most libraries in the country are those that can be found in schools that are only accessible to students, leaving out-of-school youth and other regular citizens with no means of accessing information. Thus, the establishment of more public libraries would allow the legal distribution and reproduction of books. Overall, by increasing the available books and journal articles that Filipinos can access for free, book piracy would be less frequent, given that quality information can be obtained legally through numerous sources.
We then proceed to discussing the further implications of this resolution. Increasing the accessibility of books and literature would not only deter book piracy, but also improve the reading frequency and skills of Filipinos. Furthermore, additional open access resources such as libraries and even digital books would help universal basic quality education reach a wider range of learners. If books would become more accessible in the Philippines, burdens that would once force students to commit piracy, such as affordability, are eliminated. With less financial responsibilities, Filipino students are able to obtain complete quality information needed to perform well in their studies and eventually finish their education. For this to become a reasonable alternative to piracy for many Filipinos, government agencies must work with universities and publishing companies to create more open access platforms for books and other educational materials through means such as licensing. Support from government programs would enable Filipinos to reap the benefits of their rights to access to information through legal and more ethical means.
To summarize this case, given that book piracy is the unauthorized acquisition and distribution of copyrighted materials, it is considered an ethical issue because while piracy violates the intellectual property rights of authors and publishers, it provides greater access to information, which is a human right. We argue that the ethical issue of book piracy can be prevented entirely if the root cause of it was resolved, which is the inaccessibility of informational and educational materials in the Philippines. Therefore, we recommend creating legal means of distribution, such as establishing public libraries and funding journal databases, to resolve the need for Filipinos to turn to illegal piracy for their educational needs. That is all we have today for our case study presentation. Thank you very much for listening and have a great day.